In this demonstration, we want to take a high frequency crystal oscillator as depicted by this top wave, and we want to ping it into oscillation by inputting a lower frequency. This bottom wave represents the lower frequency, but we'll see if we take this lower frequency and we overlap it onto the higher frequency oscillator, we see that we can actually ping a spike in order to start the top crystal into oscillation, because the lower frequency actually looks like DC to the higher frequency sawtooth wave up top. So we're not going to ping anything into oscillation that way. What if we draw our higher frequency oscillation example again, and what if we change our lower frequency input to a sawtooth waveform? Well, what we're going to find out is we're getting closer. If we overlap the sawtooth waveform on top of the higher frequency wave, it still looks like DC to the higher frequency. What we're interested in is the top part of the sawtooth trace, and the length, the wavelength of the absolute tip, which is called the bandwidth of the waveform, that isn't narrow enough to fit into the high frequency spike. So it's not going to ping that crystal into oscillation because it's too broad of a bandwidth. And so try a different waveform. We'll draw the high frequency crystal oscillation. And what if we created very narrow spikes? This would actually be a pulse rate. You wouldn't necessarily call this a frequency at this point. But what if your pulse rate was an exact subharmonic of the exact crystal frequency? And what if we spiked these at that exact harmonic? We would ping the crystal into oscillation here. It would look like this. It would just start oscillating, then it would start dampening, and then as it started dampening, we would hit it again here, perfectly in phase with the amplitude peak, and it would just burst into oscillation once again. And so we could sustain that oscillation, but we're not actually working with very sharp short duration pulses in the Rife machines. What we have in the Rife machine is a square pulse. And once again, if you would take this square pulse and overlap it onto the top trace, the rise skew of the square pulse could be made to occur perfectly in phase with the crystal oscillator, but then it would just continue in a DC manner, and that would not sustain an oscillation. So the idea is, with the actual Rife machine, we have a phenomenon called Gibbs phenomenon. That means when the rise skew of the pulse starts up, it doesn't rise into a perfect square wave, but it rather overshoots itself and then starts ringing a little bit, and then it continues on as the pulse envelope continues, and then it dies back to the flat line, and then somewhere over here the next pulse starts. Well, you can take this ringing, this rise overshoot, this Gibbs phenomenon, which is a property of square wave effect. You can take this and fit it right inside of that band width of our target high frequency, and it will cause the target crystal to oscillate at its own inherent frequency. And what you have then is you have this square pulse is continuing at an infinite series of odd harmonics at the exact frequency of the fundamental pulse. And so you're not only spiking the target resonance into a burst oscillation, but you're adding all of the higher harmonics in as a follow-up. And so what you get is not necessarily an initiation of oscillating and then it dampens back down and then you hit it again over here, but you're actually getting a very violent oscillation where it's the rise spike burst oscillates the crystal, and then all of the following odd harmonics which are occurring in additive phase to the process, they sustain the oscillation and increase the amplitudes of the oscillation just incredibly. And you actually what you see occur at the crystal is a very violent oscillation, and this is the way the Rife machine resonates a target.